Hello friends, welcome back to the anniversary. This is my true crime series where I tell you about a crime on the anniversary of it taking place. It just makes sense. This week marks the 34th anniversary of the murder of Anne Locke. Now, she was killed by serial rapists and killers John Duffy and David Mulcahy. I think that's how you say his name, Mulcahy, who by this time, the day that they killed Anne, had been raping their way across the greater rail network for 4 years. Shwa-na-na-na, 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 shwa-na-na-na. Anne Locke was the third fatal victim of David Mulcahy and John Duffy. Their tirade began 4 years earlier in 1982. They raped a woman near Hampstead Heath Station and then 18 more in that year alone. They were first known as the Railway Rapists, and then later on they went by the moniker the Railway Killers. The pair's attacks continued throughout the years, and in 1985 they raped 3 women on the same night, all in Hendon and the Hampstead area. Duffy and Mulcahy were pulled in for interrogation, but they were eventually released. However, in 1985, after a domestic violence incident at his home where he attacked his wife, Duffy was arrested. He was interviewed and he was eventually added to the Hart computer system as one of many thousands of men being investigated. But unfortunately, he was so far down the list of suspects that the police never got to him. Mulcahy, who was Duffy's accomplice in the rape attack, was also questioned, but he was eventually released as well. Now, these two had known each other since school days. They went to school together, they grew up together, and they had a lifelong pact to protect and to look after each other. I'm not going to go into the background of our perpetrators too much in this case, but I will put a couple of articles for you to get into if you want to find out more about them. A case like this is quite hard for me to speak about. I know that I talk about some of the worst things on the anniversary, but when it comes to rape or crimes against children, it just hits a bit differently. Maybe because some crimes, sometimes in one circumstance, most crimes can be explained. You know, it could be self-defense. It could be, you know, if I didn't kill him, he was going to kill me. It could be I was hungry, so I stole something. But with crimes against children and with rape, there isn't any circumstance, there isn't any case where you can think of a legitimate defense for that kind of crime. In September of 1985, a woman was attacked in Barnet. The description of the attacker fit Duffy, and the police did pull him in for questioning and they placed him in an identity parade, but the victim was still traumatized from the assault and she failed to pick him out. Mulcahy was also questioned but eventually released. It was a grave mistake because it cost the lives of several women, starting with Alison, who was 19 and on her way to meet her boyfriend to keep him company at work in Hackney Wick. So she got off the train at Hackney Wick station and she was followed by these two devils. They grabbed her and they repeatedly raped her, and then she was strangled, becoming their first fatal victim and setting them on the path to becoming serial killers. They weighed her body down with cobblestones and they sunk her into the River Lee. This was the first time a victim had been killed by the pair, and the police stepped up their search for the attacker, but there was no evidence that there were 2 people carrying out the attacks, and it actually took the police a while to realise that the string of rapes were all related. When 15-year-old Marjay Tambuzier was raped and murdered in April of 1986, the police stepped up their search. As well as being strangled, her body was set on fire in West Horsley in Surrey, and the fire was to try and get rid of evidence. Less than a month later, on May 12, 1986, Duffy was arrested after he was found carrying a knife. However, there was not enough evidence to charge him and he was released, only to kill again 6 days later. And this time, it's the incident that inspired this story. Anne Locke. She was a secretary and a local TV presenter, and she was abducted and murdered after she left a train at Brookman's Park Station in Hertfordshire on May 18th. In October of 1986, a 14-year-old schoolgirl miraculously managed to get away with her life after she was raped by both men. After this attack, Duffy's luck began to run out. He started stalking and attacking women on his lonesome, on one up, and he was stalking a woman in a park on November 7th. He was discovered and he was arrested. The next day, Duffy was charged with 3 murders and 7 counts of rape. His wife was crucial to the prosecution. During her interview with police, she told them about his disturbing sexual habits, which included tying her up and forcing her into sex. She also told the police that he confessed to raping a girl as well. She said that he said, "I raped a girl tonight and it was your fault." His psychotic laser stare was one that was ingrained in the minds of his terrified victims. That was cited as the reason why some of them could not bear to confront him again in a face-to-face ID parade. Despite many victims failing to identify him, 5 girls did eventually pick him out. All the time that the walls were closing in on Duffy, he remained silent about his accomplice in the rape and in the murder, sticking true to their lifelong pact. David Mulcahy was still free, he was at large, and by this time he had resumed his ordinary family life. It would seem that Mulcahy actually stopped committing crimes, he stopped offending once Duffy was in prison. The killers, like a lot of killers do, they left behind small but distinctive evidence at each crime. One piece in particular was the use of a stick as a tourniquet to strangle their victims. More significant was a particular unique strand of string that was found at the case of the murdered teenager Mulcahy Tambouzier. Several matchsticks, burnt tissues after the killers had attempted to burn her body were found as well, and it was these items, including a series of knives used in the abductions, that were found at Duffy's home. It was the other 2 murders of Alison Day and Anne Locke that were more difficult to prove due to lack of forensic evidence. Alison's body had been left in a canal for days before she was found, and any forensic evidence had to be salvaged by the lab. A breakthrough finally came in the case after 70 items of clothing were taken from Duffy's house, bagged and analysed in the lab, where they discovered 13 separate positive identifications of fibre found on the clothing of Alison and also matching the clothing of Duffy. At his trial in February 1988, John Duffy was found guilty of 4 rapes and the murders of Alison Day and Mulcahy Tambouzier, but not of Anne Locke. The judge recommended that he should serve a minimum of 30 years. Even after knowing it was unlikely that he was going to receive parole before his 3-decade sentence, Duffy offered no hint of having an accomplice, and Mulcahy was still free to rape, to murder, and to do whatever he pleased. For nearly 10 years at Whitemoor Prison, Duffy remained silent about his close, lifelong friend and accomplice having been involved in the violent rapes and murders of the 80s. Mulcahy, like I said, he had stopped attacking women very soon after Duffy's arrest. A lot of sources believe it's because he needed Duffy's support. But in 1997, the secret that Duffy had kept close to his chest due to the schoolboy pact that the two made over 20 years before was finally revealed in a conversation with someone called Dr. Jenny Cutler. She's a psychologist and she was seeing Duffy due to his recurring nightmares, and she was unprepared for his casual confession as he let it slip that he hadn't carried out the attacks alone. Dr. Cutler innocently inquired about which prison the accomplice was remanded in when Duffy dropped the bombshell that his co-rapist and murderer had never been arrested. It was reported back to the authorities and the police officers who had been involved in the case more than a decade before. The pact that these 2 boys had made in the schoolyard in the late 70s was finally broken down after 9 years in prison, because Duffy had never heard, never seen anything of Mulcahy since the day of his arrest. In 1997, forensics had advanced and DNA technology were able to scrutinise the material relating to the earlier crimes of the 2 killers. David Mulcahy was finally convicted and found guilty on the 2nd of February 2001 at the Old Bailey of 5 rapes, 5 conspiracies to rape, 3 murders, receiving 3 life sentences, and Duffy actually received an extra 12 years on top of his sentence due to the new evidence. The duo's attacks involved up to 40 brutal rapes, 3 sadistic murders, instigated the first scientific offender profiling, which I've also linked to the description. It was just too long to explain in this video. Police did everything they could to try and catch the killers, while DNA technology was some years off from identifying the maniacs before they had ruined so many lives. They were eventually caught, and as far as I can tell, they are still in prison for the crimes that they committed. So that's the story of the railway rapists turned railway killers, and I hope that you enjoyed. I feel weird saying that, but you know what I mean.